Okay, this is a short video about the Mikuni VM28SC carburetor and how to take it apart and clean it, etc. Right, so we'll start with taking the top off, and inside you'll find a large spring. That's the throttle spring that comes out. Then inside there, this is the actual throttle valve, and sticking out the bottom you'll see that's the actual jet needle. Be careful, because inside there you'll see is the pin that holds the throttle cable in place. So we can tip that out. Here is the needle, the jet needle. You'll notice that the pin, the actual jet itself, has a clip on it. That determines how high and how low the throttle valve, the jet needle is lifted when the throttle is turned. These are normally set on position 3. They start from the top and count down. I've actually got mine on 4 because I wanted to make it slightly richer. So it's richer because it lifts higher. If you want to make it leaner, you just drop it, move the clip up 1 instead of down 1. So if we turn it over, we can take out the throttle stop. Now this is like the tick over screw that determines how the speed that the engine is ticking over. It actually lifts the throttle valve. Be careful, there's a little spring on there, as you can see. So we'll put them down. You'll see here this is a sight hole which has got, you unscrew that, and on the throttle valve you'll see the throttle valve has got a mark on it there, a stamp. So when you're setting up the oil pump, that stamp has to be, when you take this screw out, it has to be in the middle, up to the top of the hole. Just check that behind this sight hole screw bolt there should be a washer which seals it. It's like a sealing washer, otherwise you'll get air into your carburetor from there. I'm not going to take that out, it's not necessary on when you're just cleaning it. So going round to the other side, another thing I want to point out, this here is an air vent which keeps the air in the float bowl at atmospheric pressure, which is quite important, because the reason that the fuel is sucked up is the air rushing through the venturi and out the other side, because it's moving across, is lower than the air pressure in the float bowl. So the air, with this air vent on the side here, it's keeping the air pressure, atmospheric pressure, so that pushes down on the surface of the fuel in the float bowl, and that forces the fuel up through the jets. And here we have, that's where the vacuum, this is the centre carb. They're all slightly different. This is a centre carb. Now if you look here, there is actually a stamp mark there, and it tells you that it's a middle carb, and it's got a code on it which will tell you what country it was destined for. This is an American one, but that's where the identifying mark is there, just below the choke. Okay, so we go round to the other side. Now this here is the air screw. This determines how much air goes through the pilot jet. So it's the pilot air passage. Right, now we can unscrew that, and if you look, you can see it's tapered off at the end. So the more it is in, the less air is there. The more it's out, the more air goes through. Now be careful, because in here is a spring that keeps it tight. It's only a little one, it's dead easy to lose. There is a drain screw here on the bottom, and of course here on the very bottom, this is the overflow pipe, which I'll show when we get it apart. Right, the bottom is held with 4 screws. Okay, so here we're going into the workings of the carburetor now. So we take the float bowl off. First thing you can see is there's a gasket in here, which we can very carefully prise up and take off. Okay, now the main workings we got here are, this here is the pilot jet. Now this is responsible for the tick over. When the engine's idling, it's responsible for up to 1/4 of your throttle position. This here is the main jet, which is responsible for wide open throttle. Both of them are used during the whole thing. Right, obviously we have the floats here that go up and down. Now be very careful when you're taking this apart, because underneath here is what they call the float needle valve. Okay, so to get the float off, there's a pin that goes through the end there. You just need to push it slightly, and this pin will slide out. There it goes. Carefully place that, don't lose it. Okay, so to remove the float from position now. So in here we have the float needle pin. This is the actual valve. And you'll see it's got like a tapered point on it. Now on the end of the pin, you'll see that little stub there. There. Now this is spring loaded, so that when the bike's going along, it's like a shock absorber. It keeps the pin in position. So next we'll remove that use a socket and just remove the float needle valve. Now be careful, because under there is a very important gasket. It's like a fibre gasket or a copper gasket. Right, next we'll remove the main jet. Okay, that's the main jet. They've all got numbers on the bottom to tell you what size they are. And then the last thing you can take off, if you look in there, you'll see in here, you'll see there's a little jet there. It's a screwdriver. Make sure you get the right sort of screwdriver. Now be very careful with this one, because they do very easily get seized in, and if you take off the head you'll have a hell of a job getting it out. You'll probably end up having to drill it out. And as you can see, they're quite small. Yeah, see the two little holes in there? You need to check that those are nice and clear. What happens is, when the choke plunger is pulled up, air is drawn up this tube. Now see the little holes there? This causes it to froth and makes it easier. The air is then sucked into the carburetor, joins the air coming from the airbox through this hole here at the side.